Ryan's office revenge. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. I sat at my usual spot near the end of the table, laptop closed, hands folded, already knowing this wasn't going to be good news. The calendar invite had said cost optimization review, which in corporate speak usually means someone's about to get the axe. My name is Scott Palmer. I'm 49 years old, and I'd been building systems for Dataflow Corp for 12 years. Before that, I spent 15 years in the Navy, from age 18 to 33, learning discipline and the importance of documentation. Those military habits had served me well in my 16-year tech career. That Tuesday morning in March, I had no idea I was about to become a casualty of their digital transformation. Brian Matthews stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, trying to look like the decisive CEO he thought he was. He was maybe 35, one of those guys who got promoted fast because he talked a good game in meetings. Jessica Rodriguez sat beside him with her tablet, already reading from the script they'd prepared. Neither of them looked me in the eye. "Scott," Brian said with that fake smile executives practice in the mirror, "we've been reviewing our long-term strategy, and some positions no longer align with where we're headed." I felt my stomach drop, but my face stayed neutral. 15 years of military training teaches you not to react until you have all the intel. Jessica didn't even look up when she delivered the punch. "Your role has been identified as redundant due to our digital transformation initiative. Today will be your last day." Redundant. After 12 years of keeping their platform running, after fixing every crisis they'd thrown at me, after designing the core architecture that was processing millions of transactions at that exact moment, redundant. I thought about the system humming away in their data center, the same system I'd built from scratch back in 2012, when the servers crashed twice a week and everyone blamed growing pains. They were calling me a legacy cost. At 49, in an industry that worships 25-year-old hotshots who can code React apps but couldn't architect a system to save their lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. "The company is moving toward cloud-native solutions and microservices," Brian continued, using buzzwords like a shield. "We need architects who understand modern development practices." Modern development practices. I'd been building distributed systems before this kid knew what a server was, but I didn't argue. At my age, you learn to pick your battles, and this wasn't one I could win with words. "Understood," I said, my voice steadier than I felt inside. The word came out sharp, military crisp. Brian looked relieved. "We appreciate your contributions over the years. It will deactivate your access by end of day." He was already reaching for his phone, ready to move on to the next agenda item. Jessica slid a packet across the table. "Standard severance terms. Return of company property. The usual. Legal language designed to make you go away quietly." I signed where they pointed, grabbed my things, and walked out. The whole thing took maybe 15 minutes, 12 years reduced to a signature and a cardboard box. But as I packed up my office, muscle memory kicked in. The old external drive from my bottom drawer, the one I'd brought from home years ago and never quite trusted the company to store. Navy habits die hard. Always keep your own copies. Always have a backup plan. I slipped it into my jacket pocket along with a notebook filled with system diagrams and design decisions. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, surrounded by the quiet of my empty house. My ex-wife Linda had taken the good furniture when she moved out 3 years ago, but she'd left me the kids' respect and a relationship that was civil, if not warm. Ryan, my 24-year-old son, was just starting his own tech career in Austin. Ashley, 21, was finishing her senior year at UT, worried about student loans and job prospects in a market that seemed to change every month. And then there was Mom, 74 years old with diabetes and a prescription drug bill that would make a pharmacist weep. My Dataflow health insurance had been covering her medications. Without it, we were looking at $800 a month just to keep her stable. The reality hit me like a cold wave. At 49, finding another position wasn't going to be easy. Companies wanted digital natives and agile practitioners, not gray-haired veterans who remembered when code had to be efficient because memory was expensive. Age discrimination was illegal on paper, but in practice, it was as common as free pizza in startup offices. I opened the external drive and started going through my files. Commit histories, architectural documents, email threads from the early days when I'd been the only one who understood how to make their system scale. And there, in a folder marked Legal, I found something I'd almost forgotten about, the patent filing patent from 8 years ago. Filed under my name alone, Scott J. Palmer, System and Method for Dynamic Load Distribution in High Availability Computing Environments, patent number 10,847,592, granted and active. I stared at the screen, reading the technical specifications I'd written myself. Every algorithm, every optimization, every fail-safe mechanism that kept Dataflow's platform running 24/7. I'd disclosed the patent to the company through proper channels back in 2016, following Navy protocols about intellectual property. I'd waited for them to handle the paperwork, to negotiate licensing terms, to do something. They never did. For 8 years, Dataflow had been running their entire business on a system I'd designed and patented myself. Every customer transaction, every data query, every dollar of revenue flowing through architecture they didn't legally own. The patent was clean, active, assigned to me alone. No corporate transfer, no licensing agreement, nothing. My hands were shaking slightly as I pulled up their current system documentation. The core routing logic was identical to my patent specifications. The load balancing algorithms matched my original design line for line. They'd added features over the years, but the foundation, the part that actually made everything work, was 100% mine. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. In the military, we had a saying, "Proper prior planning prevents poor performance." I'd followed protocol, documented everything, kept copies. They'd assumed my silence meant surrender. They were about to learn the difference between quiet professionalism and weakness. This wasn't going to be about revenge. This was going to be about accountability, documentation, and the power of reading the fine print. The next morning, I did what any good sailor does when facing a complex operation. I made a plan. In the Navy, we called it an op order: situation, mission, execution, service support, command and signal. Civilian life might not use the same terminology, but the principles still applied. Situation. Dataflow Corp had been using my patented technology without authorization for 8 years, generating millions in revenue. Mission. Protect my intellectual property and secure my family's financial future. The execution part, well, that's where things got interesting. I spent the week researching patent law and documented infringement cases. The numbers were staggering. Companies that willfully violated patents could face damages of up to 3 times the actual harm caused. With Dataflow's revenue model, that could mean serious money. But I needed leverage, and I needed an ally. That's when I remembered Mark Stevens. Mark and I had served together on the USS Hampton back in the late 90s. He'd gotten out a year before me and transitioned into the business side of tech. Last I'd heard, he'd landed at a mid-size company that competed directly with Dataflow. I found his number and made the call. "Scotty," Mark's voice boomed through the phone like we'd talked yesterday instead of 3 years ago. "How the hell are you, shipmate?" "Been better," I admitted. "Dataflow just gave me the boot. But Mark, I might have something that could interest your people." After I explained the situation, there was a long pause. "Jesus, Scott," he said finally. "If what you're telling me is accurate, you're sitting on a gold mine. My CEO would want to hear this personally." TechFlow Solutions. I'd heard of them, a solid regional player that had been trying to break into Dataflow's market for years. They had good engineers but lacked the core infrastructure to compete at scale. What I had could change that overnight. Mark arranged a meeting for the following Tuesday. "Sarah Johnson," he said. "She's sharp as a tack and doesn't waste time on bullshit. Come prepared." I spent the weekend preparing like I was briefing an admiral. Technical specifications, patent documentation, competitive analysis, implementation roadmaps. I even put together financial projections showing what TechFlow could gain and what Dataflow stood to lose. The meeting was in a small conference room at TechFlow's downtown office. Sarah Johnson was exactly what Mark had described. Mid-40s, focused, the kind of executive who'd clearly earned her position through results rather than politics. She was flanked by their CTO and head of legal. "Mr. Palmer," Sarah said after reviewing my materials, "this architecture looks remarkably similar to what Dataflow has been using to dominate our market sector." "It should look familiar," I replied. "I designed it, and I own it." I walked them through the patent filing, the disclosure timeline, the complete absence of any licensing agreement. Their legal counsel was taking notes furiously. Sarah leaned back in her chair, and I could practically see her calculating risk versus opportunity. "If we license this technology," she said, "what kind of advantage are we looking at?" I pulled out the performance benchmarks I'd prepared. "Your current system handles about 60% of the load capacity that mine processes. Implementing this would put you 18 months ahead of your development roadmap and give you the infrastructure to compete directly with Dataflow's enterprise clients." "And Dataflow's exposure?" asked their legal counsel. 8 years of documented patent infringement. Every transaction they've processed, every client they've served, every dollar they've earned using technology they don't own. I kept my voice level. Professional. They'd face a choice. Negotiate a substantial licensing fee retroactively, or defend against an infringement lawsuit with damages that could potentially exceed their annual profits. Sarah's CTO, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, spoke up. "Implementation timeline? Cleanroom development would take 4 to 6 months with a dedicated team. I'd oversee the architecture to ensure no borrowed code, but the performance characteristics would be identical to what I originally designed. The tool negotiation took 4 hours. These weren't desperate executives making emotional decisions. They were smart business people evaluating a strategic opportunity. By the end, we had the framework of a deal. TechFlow would receive exclusive licensing rights to my patent. I'd serve as a technical consultant during implementation, helping them build a clean version that avoided any IP contamination from my Dataflow work. In return, I'd get a 2% equity stake in the company, consulting fees during development, and a percentage of licensing revenues. But the real kicker was the exclusivity clause. Once TechFlow had the system running, they'd be the only company besides Dataflow with access to that level of infrastructure. And Dataflow's access wasn't exactly legal. "There's one more thing," Sarah said as we wrapped up. "We'll need to notify Dataflow of their violation before we announce anything. Clean hands, proper procedures." I nodded. I wouldn't have it any other way. That evening, I called Ryan, in Austin. My son had been worried about me since the layoff, offering to help with Mom's medical bills, even though he was barely making rent on his junior developer salary. "Dad, are you sure about this?" he asked after I'd explained the situation. "Taking on your old company sounds risky." "Son," I said, "the riskiest thing you can do in business is assume that being quiet means being weak." I documented everything properly, followed all the rules, and filed the patents under my own name. They chose to ignore the paperwork. Now they get to deal with the consequences. I could hear him thinking it over. Ryan had inherited enough of my cautious nature to understand that this wasn't about emotion. It was about intellectual property law and corporate accountability. "What about Mom's medications?" he asked. "That's exactly why I'm doing this. At 49, finding another job with comparable benefits isn't guaranteed. But protecting what I've already earned? That's just good financial planning." The surge. Notice to data flow went out the following Thursday. TechFlow's legal team had crafted it carefully. No threats, no emotional language, just facts arranged in an order that made response unavoidable. Patent number, deployment evidence, timeline of infringement. It requested immediate cessation of unauthorized use or initiation of licensing negotiations within 30 days. I wasn't in the room when Brian Matthews opened that letter, but I'd been in enough military briefings to know how bad news travels up the chain of command. First confusion, then panic, then the desperate search for someone to blame. Meanwhile, TechFlow's development team was already spinning up the clean room environment. New code repository, isolated development systems, careful documentation of every design decision. We were building the system exactly as I'd originally envisioned it, but without any contamination from Dataflow's implementations. The race was on. Dataflow had 30 days to respond to our notice. TechFlow had 6 months to build a competing platform, and I had a front-row seat to watch corporate arrogance meet documented reality. In the Navy, we had another saying: "The enemy gets a vote." Dataflow was about to cast theirs. The call came from Mark Stevens on a Friday afternoon, 3 days after Dataflow received our notice. "Scott," he said, barely containing his laughter, "you need to hear this. My contact in their building says Brian Matthews spent 2 hours screaming at their legal team yesterday." I wasn't surprised. In the Navy, we called it command climate. How leadership reacts under pressure tells you everything about an organization. Brian's response was predictable: deny, deflect, and blame someone else. "What's their official position?" I asked. "Get this," Mark continued. "They're claiming the patent is too broad, that their implementation is sufficiently different, and that you never properly disclosed it during employment." Their lawyer actually used the phrase frivolous litigation by a disgruntled former employee. I had to smile at that. Frivolous. I'd followed Navy documentation procedures to the letter, filed everything properly, and kept copies of every communication. Their legal team was either incompetent or desperate. Probably both. Meanwhile, TechFlow's development was ahead of schedule. Jennifer Walsh had assembled a team of 6 senior engineers who understood they were building something that could reshape the company's competitive position. Cleanroom development meant no shortcuts, no borrowed code, just pure architecture based on my patent specifications. I spent my days consulting with their team, explaining design decisions I'd made 8 years ago, helping them avoid the pitfalls that had taken Dataflow years to solve. It felt good to work with engineers who listened, who asked smart questions, who understood that experience has value. The first crack in Dataflow's facade appeared in week 4. A financial services client named Consolidated Trust had been having performance issues with Dataflow's platform for months. When TechFlow quietly offered them a parallel test environment, Consolidated's CTO jumped at the chance. The results were devastating. TechFlow's implementation handled 40% more transaction volume with 60% better response times. More importantly, it was stable under load. No mysterious slowdowns, no weekend emergency patches, no unexplained errors that took days to diagnose. Word spreads fast in the enterprise software world. CTOs talk to each other, engineers share benchmarks, procurement teams compare performance metrics. Within a month, Dataflow was fielding uncomfortable questions from clients they'd taken for granted. That's when Kevin Brooks, Dataflow's CTO, made his first mistake. Instead of addressing the performance questions directly, he started bad-mouthing TechFlow to clients, claiming their technology was unproven and their company was unstable. He even suggested that TechFlow had somehow stolen Dataflow's code. The irony was perfect. Kevin was accusing his competitor of stealing technology that Dataflow itself had never legally owned. Sarah Johnson handled it beautifully. Instead of responding publicly, she invited 3 major prospects to visit TechFlow's offices for technical deep dives. She showed them the clean room development process, the patent documentation, the performance metrics. She let the facts speak. One of those prospects was Meridian Financial, Dataflow's biggest client. They'd been paying Dataflow $200,000 annually for platform access. After seeing TechFlow's demonstration, they requested a full migration proposal. That's when Brian Matthews made his second mistake. He called me directly. "Scott," he said, trying to sound reasonable, "I think we can work something out. Maybe we moved too quickly with the restructuring. There might be a place for you in our new organization." I let him talk. He offered me my old job back, with a 15% raise and a better title. He suggested we could work together on resolving the patent issue. He even hinted that the whole thing could go away if I was willing to be reasonable. "Brian," I said when he finally stopped talking, "you fired me because you thought I was a legacy cost. You assumed my experience had no value. You're not offering me a job. You're trying to buy your way out of a legal problem you created. Come on, Scott. We're both professionals here. Surely we can find a mutually beneficial solution." "We could have," I replied. 8 years ago, when I disclosed the patent and waited for your company to respond. You chose to ignore it then. I'm choosing to ignore you now." The phone went quiet for a long moment. When Brian spoke again, his voice had an edge. "You know we'll fight this, right? Our legal team thinks your patent is vulnerable." "Your legal team told you that? The same team that let you use patented technology for 8 years without securing rights?" I kept my voice calm. "Brian, you can fight it if you want, but every day you keep using my system, the damages multiply. Every client meeting you take, every sales call you make, every dollar you earn. It's all built on technology you don't own." He hung up without another word. 2 weeks later, Kevin Brooks resigned. The official reason was pursuing new opportunities, but Mark's sources said he'd been forced out after the board discovered he'd never verified the intellectual property status of their core platform. The same system he'd been taking credit for in quarterly reports turned out to be a massive legal liability. Jessica Rodriguez, the HR director who'd delivered my termination with such cold professionalism, followed him out the door. The board wanted fresh leadership, someone who could rebuild relationships with clients and restore confidence in the company's governance. But the real damage was happening in the market. Dataflow's stock had been sliding steadily since rumors of the patent dispute began circulating. Financial analysts were asking pointed questions about the company's intellectual property portfolio. Enterprise clients were delaying contract renewals, citing technical evaluation needs. Meanwhile, TechFlow announced its first major client win: Meridian Financial's $300,000 annual contract, plus implementation fees. The press release was carefully worded, mentioning breakthrough architecture and industry-leading performance without directly referencing the patent situation. Wall Street noticed. TechFlow's valuation jumped 30% overnight. My 2% equity stake was suddenly worth real money. Not retirement wealth yet, but enough to cover Mom's medications for years and help Ashley finish college without drowning in debt. More importantly, we were proving that experience and proper documentation beat youth and arrogance every time. Dataflow had assumed they could erase my contribution by erasing me. They were learning the difference between firing someone and firing their intellectual property. Brian Matthews was about to learn that some problems can't be solved with confidence and buzzwords. Some problems require actually owning the solutions you're selling. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I didn't need to be there. The numbers would speak for themselves: declining revenue, client defections, legal exposure in the millions. Corporate boards hate surprises. They were about to get a big one. The board meeting lasted 6 hours. I wasn't there, but Mark's intelligence network kept me informed. Emergency session, outside legal counsel brought in, stock price monitoring in real time. By the time it ended, Dataflow's world had changed completely. Brian Matthews was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The board wanted answers about how a core business asset had been deployed without proper IP verification. They wanted to know why no one had followed up on my patent disclosure. Most importantly, they wanted to know how much this was going to cost. The answer came through Dataflow's lawyers 3 days later. A settlement offer, $1.5 million for past infringement, plus ongoing licensing fees of $50,000 annually. It was a substantial number, but not the corporate killing amount that a full lawsuit might have produced. I sat in TechFlow's conference room with Sarah Johnson and their legal team, reviewing the offer. "It's reasonable," their counsel said. "Avoids the uncertainty of litigation, gets you paid fairly for 8 years of unauthorized use." But I wasn't thinking about the money anymore. TechFlow's platform was live, serving clients, proving that good engineering combined with proper business practices could beat corporate arrogance. My 2% equity stake was now worth over $1 million as the company's valuation climbed with each new client win. "Accept it," I told Sarah. This was never about destroying them. It was about accountability. The settlement was finalized on a Thursday. Friday afternoon, Dataflow announced Brian Matthews' resignation, effective immediately. The press release cited strategic differences with the board and need for new leadership direction. Corporate speak, for we fired him before he could damage us further. That evening, my phone rang. It was Brian. "Scott," he said, and his voice was different, smaller, uncertain. "I wanted to apologize. I made a mistake letting you go." I was standing in my kitchen, looking out at the sunset through windows I'd finally been able to afford to replace. "Brian, you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to believe that experience had no value, that documentation was just paperwork, that quiet competence was weakness." "I know that now," he said. "I should have listened. Should have valued what you brought to the company." "The thing is," I replied, "you had 8 years to listen. Every quarterly report where you praised system stability, every client meeting where you boasted about platform reliability, every budget discussion where infrastructure costs stayed low. That was my work speaking. You just chose not to hear it." There was a long pause. "So what happens now?" "Now you learn what the rest of us already knew. Systems remember their creators. Intellectual property has owners. And documentation matters more than confidence." He tried to say something else, but I'd already hung up. Some conversations don't need extended conclusions. 3 months later, I was sitting in Ashley's college apartment in Austin, helping her prepare for job interviews. She'd graduated summa cum laude with a computer science degree and 0 student debt. The settlement had taken care of that. Ryan had been promoted to senior developer at his company, and he'd started asking my advice about patent filings for his own innovations. "Dad," Ashley said as we reviewed her resume, "I've been thinking about what happened with your old company. Do you think they'll be okay?" It was a good question. Dataflow had stabilized under new leadership, licensing my technology properly and rebuilding client relationships. They'd lost about 30% of their market share to TechFlow and other competitors, but they weren't dead. The industry had room for multiple players. "They'll survive," I told her. But they learned an expensive lesson about respecting the people who build their foundation. Mom's health had improved dramatically once we could afford the best medications and regular specialist visits. She'd even started asking about TechFlow's stock price, proud that her son had shown those young executives a thing or two about business. The real satisfaction came from the work itself. TechFlow had grown from 50 employees to over 200, with clients across 3 time zones. The platform I'd originally designed in 2012 had evolved into something even better: cleaner, more efficient, more scalable. But this time, my name was on every architectural document, every design decision properly attributed. I'd also started mentoring other, veteran engineers, helping them navigate the transition from military to civilian tech careers. Too many good people were getting pushed aside by an industry obsessed with youth and buzzwords. My experience had shown that documentation, patience, and proper planning could beat venture capital and marketing every time. Sarah Johnson had offered me a permanent CTO position, but I preferred consulting. At 50, I had enough financial security to choose my projects carefully. I worked with companies that valued experience, that understood the difference between building systems and building hype. Sometimes I drove past Dataflow's office building, smaller now since they'd downsized. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just the quiet knowledge that accountability had found its way to the right place. The tech industry moves fast, always chasing the next disruption, the next revolutionary platform. But infrastructure is different. Infrastructure is about foundation, stability, long-term thinking. It's about building something that lasts beyond the quarterly earnings call, beyond the next funding round, beyond the executive who takes credit for work they never did. In the military, they taught us that victories aren't won by the loudest voices or the flashiest tactics. They're won by the people who do the work, document the process, and ensure that systems function when everything else falls apart. Brian Matthews had confused silence with surrender, experience with obsolescence, documentation with irrelevance. His mistake became my vindication, but more importantly, it became a reminder that in a world of fast-talking executives and venture capital theatrics, the people who actually build things still matter. Systems remember their creators long after managers forget their names, and intellectual property belongs to those wise enough to protect it properly from the beginning.